The thing with being a beginner photographer is that sometimes you don't know what you're getting wrong. Well, today I'm going to talk about 5 mistakes that a lot of beginners make that make them look like beginners that you might not even have thought about. Let me show you what I mean. This video is sponsored by VERO. And the last mistake might be a little bit controversial, so don't come after me in the comments. So the first mistake you might not know you're making is shooting in manual mode. What? That's right. A lot of people shoot far too early in manual mode. If you're a beginner photographer, it's understandable that you want to start using manual mode on your camera as soon as possible. If I'm honest, I did this. You see, we're so excited to get started and get good at photography that sometimes we aim so high that we completely miss the target. Modern cameras have so many features that are built into them now to make them so easy to use. As a beginner, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using them. I've said this several times on my channel before. You don't need to be afraid of using easier modes. As you get better, it's important to use the more advanced modes like manual mode. One day you'll get it. But trying to use those more advanced modes too early means that you just produce a lot of very bad looking photos. If you let your camera do a lot of the heavy lifting, then you can produce really good photos really early on without having to think too much about settings. Then as you get better and better, you can switch into manual mode and be confident that you're still getting the best results. Right, I have got the action cam on in case I absolutely stack it, because that would make some great content if I fell over. And it'll also now be very disappointing if I don't. This is sketchy. Ooh. Whoa. Ooh. Oh, I made it. Sorry viewers, I made it down there without falling over. It's a shame really, I would have made some really good content. The next big mistake I see beginners make all the time is waiting for the right conditions. Now, this is actually, I think, a problem with photography on YouTube. One of the advantages of having a modest audience like mine is that I get to poll my audience on questions that I have and get a sort of aggregate answer from everybody. And recently I asked what was missing from photography on YouTube. And the overwhelming majority of people said that it was relatability. A lot of YouTube channels, and I include myself in this, aren't very relatable. For various reasons. Some people use very expensive gear, some people do a lot of traveling, some people are able to catch conditions when they arrive, and that's the category I fall into. In my day job, I'm self-employed. This means I've got a relative amount of flexibility to go and chase good conditions when they happen. If there happen to be good conditions one day of the week, I can take a day off and push that day's work onto another day, like on the weekend, for example. The vast majority of people can't do that. And as a result of this, if all you ever do is watch YouTube for your photography knowledge, then you could be forgiven for thinking that good conditions happen really regularly and that they're easy to catch. They're absolutely not. It's so hard trying to do photography in good conditions. The opportunity to do photography and having good conditions very rarely meet up together. So today I've come out at 10:30 on a Sunday morning. A time when most people would be able to do some photography if you do a 9-to-5 job. And I wanted today to be a bit more relatable for that reason. You see, this is well past when conditions are their best, and most people can get out on a Sunday morning, and if I'm 100% honest, I fancied a lie-in this morning. Don't tell anyone, that's a big no-no in the photography community. But the problem with only doing photography in good conditions is that you very rarely get to practice your craft. And photography is one of those things that takes a lot of practice to get good at it. The amount of times you have to go out on terrible days to become a good photographer is unbelievable. I know I've been out on plenty of terrible days when I was a beginner. That's the only way I managed to get half decent at photography. Now I have the opportunity to do a bit more photography in good conditions. I can get more and more portfolio shots. And because of that, I've got a good collection and I can put things together like zines. For example, the one available on my website now, joshuabegg.com. And this scene here is one of those examples. I've been here before, it didn't work out because the conditions weren't right, and the conditions aren't right again today. But I have been here when it's foggy, and those are the conditions that this scene needs. Very simple, 2 trees, one that's curved up, makes a nice frame. In the right conditions, this is, for some reason, one of my favorite photos. It's so simple, and it won't be to everyone's taste, but for me, It really works really well. But here today, I'm going to take it anyway because I'm here and I'm enjoying my hobby. Now I can't decide if this composition works. Tell me what you think. I love the way these logs look like they've been here for ages, just abandoned. They're covered in moss. They're beautifully framed by these 3 trees. It sort of works, but I can't decide. I'll decide when I get home and look at it in Lightroom, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Now, the next mistake I see beginners get caught up in so often is following gear hype. Now, you've probably noticed when you're watching YouTube that when there's a new product released, like a new camera or a new lens, everybody talks about it at the same time, usually all on the same day. There's a very good reason for that. Manufacturers, when they release a new product, they like to send this new product out to big influencers and tell them they're not allowed to talk about it until a certain day. On that day, everybody talks about it. They've had a chance to use it. And manufacturers know this is a really good way of selling their gear because they're building hype up around it. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's good that manufacturers are releasing new gear. I love new gear. And generally, they do a very good job of these new gear, and they're good for our photography or our videography, if we care about that. But the problem is, if you're a beginner, is that you think that you need to constantly be chasing this next piece of gear that's being released. You don't need to. By being distracted by hype that's being built up, you very often overlook the more important stuff to your photography. Things like practicing composition, making time to go out on photography and maybe even do some photography trips, working on things like recognizing good light. These things are the things that will make you a good photographer, not chasing that next piece of gear. I was guilty of this when I first started looking into becoming a better photographer. I was constantly looking at new things to get. And when I realized that that wasn't what was going to make me a good photographer, that's when I started progressing a lot more quickly. I stuck with what I had, and I've still stuck for a long time with what I've got, because I know there's more important things to being a good photographer than the latest piece of gear. So one real danger when you're a beginner photographer is social media trends. Now, very often, social media goes through waves of what's cool and what's not at the moment. A lot of people doing all the same thing at the same time, chasing views and followers. At the moment, there happens to be a very strong Wes Anderson trend where people are pretending that they're in Wes Anderson films. And I actually really like that one. I think that's a really cool sort of inspiration. People who have been inspired by Wes Anderson as a film director, if you don't know who he is, and he has a very unique style, and a lot of people have taken that on board, and I think that's actually a really good one. However, not all photography trends and social media trends are good, because if you're constantly chasing a trend, what's cool at the moment, rather than what fulfills you creatively and what you want to do, it's a very quick way to get burnt out, especially if you're a beginner photographer. I compare chasing algorithms to like throwing muck at a wall. You will hit that wall sometimes with the muck and some of it will stick, but it won't look very nice. You have to be in the right place at the right time for algorithms to work. And if you're trying to build an audience like me, this can be a real temptation of trying to follow these trends. Sometimes you do have to do things for the algorithm. For example, the title of this video will be search engine optimized because I want as many people as possible to see it. The difference is, though, that I don't let that affect my photography work. I do what I feel like I creatively want to do because I know I'll burn out in my creativity if I just try and follow photography trends that are good on social media because I want to please an algorithm. What I would suggest you do, if you are trying to build an audience, is maybe just occasionally do something that you enjoy that's trending at the moment. For example, this Wes Anderson thing, but concentrate more on what fulfills you as an artist and do what's necessary. And this actually links really well onto this week's sponsor, which is VERO. Now, VERO is a social media app which very much concentrates on the social aspect of social media. Because VERO isn't funded by adverts, there's no need for them to push trends and keep people addicted to their app. What that means is that you don't get these social media trends on VERO. It truly is about community and building relationships with people. And I've experienced this on VERO. The work that gets shared on there is truly inspirational, especially amongst the photography community, and it's continually growing. I've built quite a following on there simply because it's built up for people who really do appreciate photography. The other good thing is that you don't have to worry about adverts coming across your feed all the time. You can just concentrate on what inspires you creatively. And that's what I really appreciate about VERO as an app. So if you want to follow me on there, there's a link in the description that will take you straight to my page, and maybe go and comment on there on some of the mistakes that you've made in the past. I'd love to hear. Anyway, the rain stopped now, so I think it's time to carry on. Okay, so I think we found what could be the best photo of the day here. We've got this lovely S-bend that leads to some fallen trees over this stream here in the woodland. The only thing I think would make it better is if there was some wildflowers growing. So I might be coming back here in maybe a few weeks' time to see if any are coming. I don't know if there will be any here though. It would be a real shame if there aren't, but man, it would be beautiful. But what I'm having to do is quite a wide scene. Now, because I've got a crop sensor camera, I shouldn't need to focus stack this. I'm taking different focus points just in case, front, back, and middle, but I doubt I'll need to focus stack it. But one thing I almost certainly will be doing is editing that photo. And that's the final mistake, and probably a bit of a controversial mistake to bring up, is not editing your photos. Now, I know there are a lot of people that don't like the idea of editing their photos, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not talking here about adding in birds or changing colours dramatically or adding in mist that isn't there. I'm talking simply here about adjusting your photo so that it actually looks like what's in front of you. I get a lot of comments on my videos all the time of like, oh, I don't like that you edit your photos. Why can't you just show us the JPEGs? But to be honest, JPEGs on cameras are very rarely what is actually in front of the camera. The reason most professional photographers shoot in RAW is because the camera then takes as much information as possible for you to translate into a good photo later in editing. So even just by doing a few basic edits, you can produce a much more realistic and better photo by editing it than by just using JPEGs. Things like white color balance, for example. Maybe your photo's a bit too warm or a bit too cool. And maybe you need to crop something out. Maybe you need to bring down the highlights or raise the shadows. The contrast might be wrong. All of these things are very small, very light edits, but they can make a massive difference to your photography. The other reason you might want to edit your photos is that you add your own style. Now, this is something that might come a bit later on in your photography journey, but I see editing my photos as a very different practice to taking my photos. I enjoy them both as two separate things. And that's because by editing my photos, I add my own style and I take it from being a photo to sometimes what I feel is a piece of art. And that's my own personal opinion. You don't have to have that opinion. But I honestly do think it is a mistake not to edit your photos even just a little bit. Now, of course, if you're an absolute beginner, the idea of editing a photo can be quite intimidating. Well, in this video here, I show how I captured one of my favourite photos of the year and then went on to edit it in a really simple way. I'll see you next time. Right, it is time to make a thumbnail. Let's see how stupid I can make this. Honestly, the things you have to do as a YouTuber. Ugh. Should get a real job.